speak about a different subject, but one that is imminent and necessary for us to consider, and that is the current Iranian sanctions issue. Back in 2007, when Iran had only about 700 centrifuges spinning to enrich uranium, we, and I mean by we, I mean nearly the entire community of nations, determined that this Iranian behavior by this Iranian regime was simply too dangerous to tolerate. The UN Security Council began the process of passing a series of resolutions demanding that Iran stop these activities completely. The United States, led by many here in the United States Senate, began the very careful and painstaking process of amassing an international coalition, backing increasingly tough sanctions all of these aimed explicitly at forcing the Iranian regime to end enrichment activities. And the reason for this was a nuclear weapons capable and armed Iran posed an imminent threat, not just to the Middle East, but to the world community. That was a consensus agreed to by the world community and supported by resolution after resolution out of the Security Council of the United Nations and by proclamations from not only our country, but countries around the world. That entire effort for some years has been devoted, our entire effort has been devoted to this goal, ending Iranian enrichment activities with a consensus that nuclear weapon possession or capability posed unacceptable consequences. Now, that goal is nowhere in sight. Neither the interim agreement that currently is being employed, nor the administration, nor any of the negotiating partners even refer to these resolutions or this multi-year strategy of achieving the objective that we set out to achieve. That objective was Iran would cease enrichment of uranium that could be used as enriched uranium to achieve nuclear weapons capability. That goal has suddenly been totally abandoned. The current interim agreement explicitly concedes to the Iranians their right to continue enrichment activities with only meager limitations, all of which can be reversed by Iran, the mullahs there, in an instant. The mullahs in Iran boast publicly of this great negotiating victory for them, which goes against everything we've been trying to do for the past 6 or 7 years. It seems unassailable that Iran came to the negotiating table at long last directly as a result of the consequence of the hardship that was achieved by employing these international economic sanctions that were imposed on this regime. They would not have come, they resisted coming to the negotiating table until these things really started to hit home. But what's equally clear is that the regime wants sanctions relief and has sought this deal, this interim deal, to accomplish it, which, unfortunately, we have given them that relief. And what did we get in return? What we get in return is having negotiated away our very core purpose for doing this in the first place. Instead of using our leverage at this point for greater vulnerability on the Iranian side, continuing to make the progress we had to bring Iran to the position of ceasing to enrich that uranium, we've blunted our very best leverage and our very best tool. Instead of pressing our long-term advantage, we've begun to relieve the pressure on Iran to cease their efforts to gain nuclear weapon capability. And why have we done this? Why have we abandoned our goal to stop Iranian enrichment? Because the Iranian negotiating team has told us that they would never tolerate an end to their long, expensive path to an enrichment industry. So here's my conclusion about all this, my central conviction on this matter. If those on the other side of the table tell us in advance that our long-held conviction and purpose is asking too much, instead of meekly complying with their request, then we must increase that pressure until they change their mind, not abandon our own goal as being too tough. So what have we bought with this interim agreement? According to the Bipartisan Policy Center, which I used to be a part of, a player with, the main practical consequence of this claimed freezing is that the time Iran now needs to produce a critical mass of highly enriched uranium, which is 20 kilograms, with current centrifuges has gone from an estimated 59 days to 63 days. What did we gain from the agreement? 4 days. 4 days longer that it will take Iran once they flip the switch to enrich that, get that highly enriched uranium, which allows them nuclear weapons capability. It seems clear to me that among Iran's principal objectives now is to break apart the strong international consensus we've worked so hard over so many years to forge, and prospects for them to do so, for the Iranians, look pretty darn good. Now that we've given away the store, we already hear talk of further interim agreements. All the talk about this interim agreement, it's going to be enforced, and by golly, if they don't live up to what we have asked them to do, then there's no more extension, no more interim agreements. Well, it doesn't look like that's what's going to happen, because clearly the Iranians have not lived up to what they agreed to do or what we've asked them to do, but there seems to be no prospect in place for our returning back to sanctions unless the United States Senate, on a bipartisan basis, and there is bipartisan support for this, is able to impose that next round of sanctions should this interim agreement not achieve its purposes. And yet we are being blocked currently with bringing this legislation to the floor. I again want to repeat, this is bipartisan legislation led by the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, led by those who have been actively engaged and involved in this. I may have made a mistake there with the chairman. Senator Menendez from New Jersey is leading this particular effort, and it is a bipartisan effort. But now we're being asked to stand down. We're not even given a chance to exercise our vote on this, which we're attempting to add to the pending legislation here. And again, delay is putting us in a position of essentially conceding to the Iranians for what they want to have and to give them the opportunity to continue to pursue their quest for nuclear weapon capability. Obviously, for them, that's just fine. If they can turn the protracted uncertainty and gradual sanctions relief into a series of lesser agreements. But for us, more interim agreements will mean that our allies will become accustomed to these gradual changes and the increasing commerce of Iranian oil. They will become less inclined to again reverse course almost regardless of Iranian actions. And following that prolonged process, then when we will confront a far healthier Iran, but with a weaker coalition opposed to Iranian nuclear ambitions. Iranian ambitions and capabilities will grow. Our efforts will halt the Iranian quest for nuclear capability. Those will diminish. And we will then be left with a choice of containing or taking military action against a nuclear-capable, if not nuclear-armed Iran. The President has said repeatedly that containment is not an option, and it's not for me either. And since he has said also that military force is an option, it seems clear to me that this current course is more likely to bring us to that stark point than to anything like a negotiated settlement. We must be determined to do what we can here in the Senate to prevent us from reaching that point. Not only must we refocus our government and other friendly governments on the need to eliminate Iran's nuclear infrastructure in any final agreement, no matter how difficult that might be, we must also oppose Iran's likely intentions to prolong the negotiations process intended to continue to weaken our coalition. The Nuclear Weapons-Free Iran Act that I have co-sponsored will give us great leverage in doing that. It will make it clear that the United States Senate will not support playing Iran's game any longer than we already have. Mr. President, I deeply regret that we are not being given the opportunity to debate this issue before the American people and among ourselves, that we are not being able to have a vote in the United States Senate as to whether our current policy that this administration is pursuing is the right policy to achieve the goal which we all agree to. 4 presidents, 2 Democrat, 2 Republican, 4 last presidents have declaratively said a nuclear-capable Iran is unacceptable. This president, this current president, President Obama, has stated that over and over. And yet here we are engaged in a process that advances that prospect. It puts us at a disadvantage, and we're giving away the one tool that has brought Iran to the negotiating table. And they trumpet it publicly, how they have outsmarted us and outnegotiated us and achieved what they wanted to achieve and diminished our opportunity to achieve what the world community wants to achieve. We will rue the day when we have had Iran almost to the point of where we could achieve our goal, and we've stepped back and conceded to their promise, their commitment to continue to enrich, continue to add centrifuges, to continue their pursuit of nuclear weapons capability and nuclear weapon ability and being armed with that will pose unimaginable consequences to us. There's been total agreement on that among the world's nations. And yet here we stand at the moment of decision, right when we, in a sense, had them where we wanted to get them, and we concede that. I deeply regret that we have not been able to move forward with these additional sanctions to be employed if, in this first interim agreement, Iran does not live up to the objectives and the goals which we have demanded. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.